in which, and I gotta see if I got the picture, in which one of her homeless patrons had actually tried to set the library on fire. It's a slightly sad story, but I won't go into it because I just don't have the emotional EQ to do it. But she was like, could you change the title? And I'm like, no, it's already out there. I'm sorry, but I promise to do a public service announcement, which I will now do. Please do not set your libraries on fire. If we could, in no way should this presentation be seen as advocating or in some way provoking setting a library on fire. But what I would like to say is that clearly we have some interesting stuff going on, and we're going to go from there. Then I get this email last week, and I don't know if you know of this gentleman. This is Mike Eisenberg. Mike Eisenberg was the former dean at the University of Washington and a former professor at Syracuse University, and he was my advisor. And Mike on a regular basis just decides to poke at me. And so this was the entire content of the email I received last Wednesday. So, in 200 words or less, what's the future of libraries and librarianship? Go. Right? Now, it turns out he's coming in December to have this talk. I think he's cheating. So, as Mike is clearly going to be listening to this, Mike, here's your answer. All right? So, the last thing I'd like to say, and this is, as an academic, I must also just, as a qualitative researcher, it's my job to tell you every reason you should not listen to me. So here's the next reason not to listen to me. That I am a currentist, not a futurist, and yes, I know currentist is not a word because I will get emails, but there's this idea that somehow we're going to project to the future. I don't pretend to know what the future is. I have no sorcery or science to tell me. I'm also not that interested in trying to predict the future. I'm much more interested in trying to change what we're doing now. So rather than talk about how we're all going to be taking our jetpacks and flying to these levitating buildings and all this stuff and we will mentally absorb things, I really want to talk about some trends that are going on and talk about what we can do about them. So my philosophy of the future is best phrased by Alan Kay's, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And since I will also get emails on this, yes, Abraham Lincoln said something remarkably similar, but I don't think they cheated off of each other, so I'm sticking with Alan. So, that being said, we should plan for the future. Even though we can't predict it, even though we can't make it happen, that doesn't mean that we should feel like we're a victim to it or it's just going to occur without us trying it. And the best way I can think about planning is if you take sort of the current situation and you say, if nothing else changes in whatever topic we're looking at, this is my predicted future. So if we don't go out and change legislation, or we don't go advocate, or we don't change our MLS degree, or whatever it is, this is sort of what we think could happen, right? And then what you want to do is you want to develop an ideal future, which is what you want to happen. And between those 2 points, there is almost always a gap. And if there is not a gap, you are not an interesting person. You really need to work on that. Because, sorry, we're going to do some social therapy too. You said provoke. I thought you meant personally. All right. So we have this gap. And this gap can be things like, I would like someday to be a tenured professor. I had a very big gap to overcome. It can be very small. I want to eat at a nicer restaurant, whatever it is. And that working back from that, we can then begin to develop a series of steps and tasks that take us to that predicted future. The reason I bring this up, this then becomes our agenda. And the reason I bring this up is for a couple of things. One, I think in the LIS program, so I'm going to speak in the context of people who have either lived through or hopefully lived through an MLIS program or are offering one. I think too often we look at ideal future, we look at these predicted futures and we feel like we're done. We feel like, oh God, it's all going to happen to us, right? So the Republicans got elected in on Tuesday, clearly we're all doomed, right? And Obama's been elected president, clearly we're all doomed. And Google is going to come out with a new product and we're all doomed. And there's a lot of we're all doomed. And I think we need to give up. The being doomed part, actually. And so, because we're all doomed, might as well give up. But if we look at it instead as a series of tasks that we can accomplish, I think we have a much better chance of doing this. Also, I see a lot of LIS literature, and this is why I'm actually a great suspect of data, that we see a lot of this is what the future is going to look like, and the truth is we don't know if no intervention occurs, but we have the chance to do that intervention. And I'm convinced, and this may discredit a lot of what I'm trying to say, I'm convinced that the library science extended community actually has a great deal of control of its future. There are many that feel that we're sort of at the whims and such, and I don't think we're there. I mean, even the literature, we've gotten, if you read the popular literature, it's gone from the dinosaurs of the library, the obsolete libraries, and these poor book warehouses, to now we're talking about maker spaces and tattoos and things like that. And when I read this popular literature, everything from Fortune magazine to the New York Times to local things, there's this gap. It's like people have shown up to a library after so many years and they're like startled that we're still there. And then they're startled that we're doing really cool stuff. And then they take this step back and go, but why the hell are you doing that really interesting stuff? Why is there a 3D printer in your library? Why are you lending out ebooks? Aren't ebooks the villains? And so there's this gap. I think we have an opportunity to fill a narrative of what libraries can be, should be, and particularly what librarians can be and should be. The other thing, and I want to sort of leave this for later, is as someone in the academic setting, as someone who controls the world of our curriculum, I think we need to really seriously rethink not the curriculum, but the process of the curriculum. Why can't a curriculum have an agenda and a change and a timeline? Why can't we say, we're building this curriculum and it is going to change on this basis and by these milestones and on a regular basis? Why do we feel like we have to set this monolithic curriculum and then, oh, it's 7 years later and we're about to get accreditation, let's look at it again? Why can't we continuously look at it and talk about change? And in an activist way to say, if we really see libraries going in this direction, can our curriculum push that as opposed to simply reflecting what is? So that's a little bit of prefacing that I want to provide you as we move ahead. The other one, and I think this is my first point for you to think about, is that the future of libraries and the future of librarians are different. For a very long time, we have defined librarianship as the skills, the tasks, the people, the management, the processes that occur in a library. And we've tried and fiddled around the edges with the definition of library. Well, we've thrown digital on front of them, and we've thrown virtual in there every so often. But we're still talking about the context and work and processes of people in an institution. And in fact, if you read all the literature and you read how we talk about it, even, you know, we have the American Library Association. I mean, I didn't go to Las Vegas in the summer, but I don't think too many libraries actually showed up. I mean, a library at best can sort of exert gravity, decay, and shield you from the rain. Right? They don't do anything. And so it always boggles my mind when I see press releases of the library now provides. No, it doesn't. People had to make that decision. People had to go to it. Librarians do the work. And you're saying, Dave, you're playing semantic games with me. Yes, but they're important semantic games. Because if we constantly push the royal we, if we constantly push the institution, we marginalize personal agency. We marginalize the belief, the ability, and the documentation and the credit of individuals acting in unison, in coordination, and to make things happen. So we need to begin to disconnect these futures, and we need to begin to disconnect these words. Right? The library is not hosting me. The school is not hosting me. Someone had to make a decision. Someone had to go, well, I like this. No, what the hell, right? Someone had to take the blame for this. We need to begin thinking about that on a regular basis. I don't train libraries. I don't train library workers. I train librarians. And you could say, oh, Dave, train. All right, I educate. I would go, I facilitate learning of. We can keep going with this. But my point of this is we need to begin to disconnect these two things. So when we talk about the future, actually, Mike Eisenberg's comment is not inappropriate. What is the future of libraries and librarians? So this is my sort of peek. I think the future of libraries is a facilitated place of learning and making. Right? Now, a couple of key words need to happen there. First of all, facilitated place. I get a lot of, as you'll hear through this discussion, I do a lot of talking about the focus of librarians needing to be on the community. Not on the collections, not on the stacks, not on the facilities, not on things, but the community itself. And we need to unleash the community and help the community, and et cetera. And the almost instantaneous response I get back is, all right, what's the difference between a public library and a community center? And to which my pithy response is always, what's wrong with being at the center of your community? Right? But it's not a room. It's not a 3D makerspace in a vacuum. It's not a bunch of books around the corner. It's a facilitated environment. And one of the things that we're going to talk about with librarians is the value that librarians bring to any space, but particularly a library space. Their value is not necessarily in giving you free access to the stuff around you, but actually the process of identifying what that problem is, putting you in connection, understanding did it make sense. There's a whole range of values that the individual brings to that transaction that we have ultimately marginalized by talking about buildings and organizations and processes and not about people and agency and action. So a facilitated place of learning, and as you'll see in a moment, I'm a big believer in learning. In fact, so I'm in an information school. I'm from an information school. Here's the trick. I don't know if those of you who are not in the information school, I'm going to tell you the secret. We have no frickin' clue what information is. I mean, I asked 5 of my faculty once, I walked by, what's information? I got 10 answers. My favorite was, I don't know and I don't care. Right? You think about it, it doesn't make any sense. What is information? Because number one, we can't quantify it. How much information is in a book, a room, a person, an idea? We don't know because it's different from you to me. That means it's not an abstract thing. It's not separable. I know what data is. I got a good sense of data. I know what knowledge is. That's the thing that guides our behavior. I can test it, I can assess it, I can figure it out. But this squishy stuff in the middle, I mean, our library is filled with information. Is it? If someone's read all the books, does this help? And the other thing is, this chair is filled with information, folks. From its fabric to its design to what the hell was someone thinking about, is this a casino? I don't know. Right? And yet we say, oh, but that's not information, that's a chair. All right, I then refer you to Buckland and we can talk about antelopes. But 3 people got that joke. All right. Now, by the way, I threw this back at Mike. He threw it back in my face and said, oh, but Dave, they don't have to be places. And I said, yeah, virtual places count. And in fact, virtual places are very important in this definition. Because the idea is a place is something different than something that's consumed, or an object, or an artifact, or a document. It's a place of interaction. And that interaction can be one-on-one, it can be between the system, it can be multiple people, but that place thing matters. And so we see in academic environments, quiet places, meeting places, places where undergraduates can escape their dorm mates. These are legitimate uses of a physical space. But that physical space, that place, is a tool. And if we don't start thinking of our virtual systems and our interfaces and the databases, first of all, let's stop calling them databases. Right? Databases are pieces of software you add data to, not things that are stored that you pay way too much for and are going to bankrupt your organization. Totally 2 different things. Right? They're e-resources. But look at the policies that librarians write about the use of those 2 places. So if you look at the physical space, how they can kick you out, what it should be like, it's all about how to be social. When to be loud, when not to be loud, what is harassment, what is not harassment. It's all about how can't we all get along. And then look at the policies that librarians write about their e-resources. How to be a thief. What is copyright infringement? Who can get here and who can't? It's all about individual action. So are we creating places online or are we simply creating means and interfaces of consumption? That doesn't fit that definition very well. So when we talk about virtual or digital libraries, we're not talking about stuff online. We need to be talking about places online in which we can have interaction and facilitate learning. The other one up there is making. I think making and learning are the synonyms, but frankly, it's pithy, so I'm throwing it out there. And making is more than the idea. First of all, libraries have always been maker spaces. But if you haven't done anything different because you're doing 3D printing, whatever, you're not doing it right. So we've always used libraries as institutions, organizations, collections, what have you, to come in and learn, to create books, to create knowledge, to create scholarship, to create education, to create opportunity, to create fascination, to create lots of stuff. But now we're putting it front and center. Now we're saying, come to us not to grab and leave. Right? I hate the phrase user. Hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. Right? Who in their right mind wants to be used? So, how are you today? I'm fine. What'd you do today? I used my wife. Really? I'm not getting back in the house if I use that kind of terminology, and yet we're happy. Oh, bring the users to us. No. People create, people learn. They may just create in their heads, they just maybe create in their worlds, but they're making new understandings, maybe they're making new artifacts and physical items, they're making new opportunities. It's a place of making. So learning and then contributing back to the community. That's what I see the role of libraries. And by the way, it's really easy when I use the word community to say, oh great, another public library guy. K-12 schools are communities, communities of teachers and students and administrators and parents. This university is a community of scholars and educators and janitors and cooks and all of these amazing people. This is our community. So when I use that word, it's not, oh, just public. Everything's a community. A law firm is a community that law librarians help facilitate and serve. It often includes a collection. This is where people tend to lose me. Can you have a library without a collection? Yes, you can have a library without a collection. If it's a facilitated place of learning and making, you're going, Dave, that's a school. We'll get there. Right? But the true collection of any library is its community. Those books, those materials, those stacks, those databases, those information systems are all there to help our communities learn and make, to move forward. So when we judge and evaluate our effectiveness, we don't go, how much stuff do we have? Association of Research Library Statistics. We have to do, how much good do we do? How much difference do we make? That idea is the community is that collection. Because those materials, if they just sit there and collect dust, even if it's virtual dust, and yes, there's got to be virtual dust, they're useless. They don't matter. It's irrelevant. So we have to look at this idea of learning and making and the true collection. I'm going to talk about that in a second. In fact, I think I'm going to talk about it right now. This is the Fayetteville Free Library outside of Syracuse, New York. It's the first public library that had a makerspace, co-created by Sue Considine, their director, and Lauren Britton, a librarian student at the time and now a doctoral student at SU. And you can see behind these ladies, that's a 3D MakerBot right there. That guy's listening to music. These people are cutting things. I don't know. Hopefully not themselves. And so this is their makerspace. But what's fascinating about Fayetteville is they have this thing, they go, that's the makerspace. And they started there. But something really interesting happened. They started saying this making thing, if we define it as 3D printing, we're crazy. They got sewing machines. In fact, the librarians were much more terrified of the sewing machines than they were of the 3D printers. They said, we'll figure out the 3D printer sewing. I got no clue. What did they do? They brought the community in who knew how to use the sewing machines and taught, and etc. These girls are actually part of a Geek Girl summer camp. We'll get that in a second. This is their children's area, youth services, and you'll see it says Little Makers. And they're making through cardboard cutouts, and they're making through puppets, and poor Sue has to go through dumps finding things that people can put together in different interesting ways, and loves broken watches. And so the idea is the kids actually maintain this space. When they make something, they go put it in, and they curate that space around it. Everything's making. Their teen area is a making community where they come and they do video production. And yes, they read graphic novels and then they go talk about them and do podcasting. This was the Geek Girl Summer Camp. In the Geek Girl Summer Camp, we worry about STEM education. They brought in women to talk about STEM disciplines. They brought in an Air Force Reserve pilot. And she came in and talked about what it was to be a pilot in the military and what it was to be a mother and what it was to grow up and study science. And she brought walkie-talkies and they talked to each other. They actually brought in a cement truck or a cement mixer where they mixed baking soda and water into a non-Newtonian fluid. It's the one where if you pour it out and you put your hand slowly, it's like a liquid, but you slap it, it becomes hard. They were running through the library on baking soda. And they brought in trebuchets and they built catapults. And so these poor library patrons were coming in to check out books and pom-poms were flying over their heads. Back and forth. But everything's become a makerspace there. And it's all started with this simple form. Anytime you go in and check out a book, or you check out a Kindle, or you check out a 3D printer, or you check out whatever, you get this form and it asks you 3 questions. What do you love to do? The second one is, what are you passionate about? She said we get odd looks when we ask that, but we do. And then this is really crucial. Would you be interested in sharing what you know or teaching it to your neighbors? She said several years ago, we totally reversed how we thought about library volunteers. Library volunteers used to be, can I help you, librarian, do your job? She said we reversed it. The librarian's job is to help the community, the volunteer, do their job. And that job may be sharing what they know. And so through this form, they've done everything from sewing and knitting that we mentioned before, Civil War lectures, community gardens. They've had digital video production, Minecraft. If you have a child, you know Minecraft. Right? Dinner is always about creepers and underworlds. And so they had this Minecraft tournament. They brought all these tweens and teens in, and they were playing Minecraft, and they would set it up to capture the flag. And these teenagers came up to these librarians who'd set it up, and they said, well, that sucked. You didn't use this mod, you didn't do this. And the librarian said, without batting an eye, you'll do the next one. And now it's a teen event, and that's turned into robotics competition and Lego competitions. What these librarians have learned is a library is you do not serve people by sitting in front of a desk and them on the other side. You serve by sitting next to them. That they are doing collection development, where the community is the collection. You say, oh, Dave, that's a cheap metaphor. No. When someone comes in, I'm Dave Lankus, I would like to do a session on self-publishing. They don't just say, great, next Thursday. They sit there and figure out, do you really know what you're talking about? Or can you speak in front of a group? Or maybe that's not the best way to do it. Maybe you could build resources. Maybe you could be used in this way. Maybe you could do one-on-one tutoring. They work with their community to get new topics, what's interesting, what's happening. And that is literally their collection. Do they still check out books? Absolutely. Do they have ebooks? Absolutely. Do they have makerspaces? Absolutely. But they also have engineers, and they have woodworkers, and they have seamstresses, and they have a brilliant community that comes and says, that's my library, that's where I go to learn and teach. That's where I go to participate. That's a radically different idea of a space than we are a service that we serve people, because we have users who use us. Very different. Which means that you need to prepare your librarians very differently, right? So first we have to define a library outside of an institution. That's shun, just in case you didn't make it. I had to switch from a Mac to a PC, and I'm not bilingual, so that's as close as I could get, right? Now this was very interesting. So I've said this before. I have long contended a room full of books is simply a closet, but that an empty room with a librarian is a library. I've had lots of people not like me saying that. Or, oh yeah, fine, great, my bathroom's a library. Fine, it's a library. I didn't say you had to do public services in every library, right? But where this came from was actually, I was having a conversation with the dean, Dave Fensky at Drexel, and he said, you know, we have what's holding libraries back, because Dave Fensky has no opinions, is the fact that we haven't been able to define the profession outside of the context of the institution. In other words, we can talk all we want about having librarians hired at Google and Yahoo and all this other stuff, but if the entire world perceives, including us and how we prepare them, as librarians work in libraries, that will never happen. You can't take this potential where we see it and make it available to everyone if we've stopped the conversation before it begins. He says, I don't think anyone's actually done this definitional work. So 3 years later, what I thought was going to be an easy project, I made a book. It's not my cat, by the way. And, you know, it's a thick book, and it's hard to take on subways. This is the feedback I get. And the Atlas of New Librarianship, in which I said, all right, this is what it means to be a librarian, regardless of where you work, regardless of what you do, regardless of how you do it. We have people that work in libraries that aren't librarians, nor would they claim to be. We have people who work, by the way, in libraries that don't have the title of librarians that are, because I think there are 3 ways to become a librarian. Through training, through title, or through spirit, right? We all know people who have been hired as librarians where they got the library title, and we're not quite sure why, but they got the title. We prepare librarians, but we all have these people that are spiritually librarians, right? Whether they are. I'm also convinced I have the dead bus test for librarians, which is if this person gets hit by a bus, does the library close? They're a librarian, right? Right? If the janitor's not showing up and the men's room's not being taken to, that janitor was a librarian, right? So we have to, and mostly it's CIOs, but I like that story better. Anyway, so what is a librarian? How do we define it? I think there are three things that help us define a librarian. The first is the mission. What is the mission of librarians? Not the mission of a library, not the mission of an institution, not the mission of a person in an institution, but a professional mission. And this is the mission that I purport. That the mission of a librarian is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in, and I know for the grammarians out there, that should be in his or her community. So, what do we do? Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out about this. First, it's a two-part mission. The first part is that the mission of librarians is to improve society. Feel free to stop it there. That part is actually an ethical counterbalance to the second part of the mission. That is, to facilitate knowledge creation within communities. And you're going, ethical counterbalance, what are you talking about? Are we going to help a 13-year-old figure out how to make methamphetamines? Well, the community wants it, we're building knowledge, but is that what we ethically feel we should be doing? And, by the way, I want to be really clear. We can have long, sustained arguments on the ethics and values. I love it. That's coming up. But I just want to point out that there's two parts to that. Because that reason there's two parts and it matters is because librarians are of their communities, which means you are not silent, you're not unbiased. You go in and you have an effect on the community and you have an advocacy role to play. You can't simply say, if the community wants it, we do it. Because that's not about improving society, that's about being a servant. And that's not a professional task. So mission. The problem with trying to define librarians solely by their mission is when the first time I put this up, I was at the Charleston conference. And a publisher said, that's my mission. And then a teacher said, that's my mission. And then professors say, that's my mission, and that's my mission. And you know what? They're right. We have a lot of knowledge-based industries in this country and in this world, and they all share a mission like this. I wish more of them had the first part of the statement, but that's true. So it's not enough to say your mission solely defines your profession. So the second thing is, what do you mean by facilitate? When you talk about facilitating knowledge creation, what does that mean? Because the easy thing, I've seen this over and over again. You ask a librarian, identify the sub-communities that you serve. Okay, I serve seniors, I serve kids, I serve divorcees, I don't know, it's a weird place. I serve, what was the other one I heard? Commuters and skateboarders. I thought those would be two put together, right? Or I serve faculty, I serve students, I serve lawyers, I serve paralegals, whatever. You go, all right, how do you serve them? And they say, well, I have stuff in the collection. I buy books for them. I say, do they know that? Well, so is it the book that's serving them, or is it you that's serving them? So, what are the means of facilitation? First, access. Access to knowledge. And I want to be really picayune because I'm in an august academic institution. I want to be clear about my terminology. When I say knowledge, I don't mean something that's written, I don't mean artifacts, I don't mean something that exists outside of a human's head. I mean what's in our heads. How we affect and see the world and affect our behavior, that's knowledge. You can't write it down, you can't put it in a book, you can only communicate it. Those books, that's not knowledge. They're artifacts of knowledge. They're our attempt to transfer it, but they're not knowledge itself. If it was, then I could write up here everything Dave says is true, and you would see it, and you would know that, and I'd be done. But it doesn't work that way, right? How we take it, how we interpret it, how we relate it, that's knowledge. So when we talk about access, we don't simply talk about access to artifacts and collections and stuff. We also talk about access to people and ideas and conversations and communities and groups. You say, oh, great, Dave, revolutionary, really provoking me here, thanks so much. Because we've done that forever, right? Except maybe not the people part. But it's insufficient. Because simply getting to the right conversation is irrelevant unless you know what's going on. In other words, if we're having this discussion and I'm speaking in Mandarin Chinese and you don't speak Chinese, it's not helpful. If this conversation is going online and I don't have online skills, put me in front of a computer, I'll stare at it, it's not going to help me. So the second thing we need to do as librarians is we provide knowledge, training, education, learning experiences. We bring people the skills to access those conversations. Information literacy, if you want to throw that one out. So I can get to the conversation, I know what's going on, but do I feel safe having that conversation? That's the environment question. Now there's lots of different kinds. There's physical safety, but there's also intellectual safety. There's emotional safety. I'm not going there. In terms of physical safety, public libraries do it. We do it by having a guard at the bottom. We do it by having cards. We do lots of things with physical safety. Intellectual safety, one could say, oof, that's our wheelhouse as librarians. We love intellectual freedom, intellectual access, fight against censorship, all of that stuff. And that's great, but do we really? If anyone's been keeping up with the wonderful Adobe ebook conversation that's going on, where we provide people nice, private, secure reading through Adobe ebook, and Adobe just happens to be sending all that data back in clear text, and we didn't know it, yay, right? Are we truly providing an environment that's safe to do that in? How do we provide that kind of safe environment? My new favorite exercise is we were having discussion of values with my first-year library science students, and I said, all right, we're all going to the library. I want you to go through our academic library, and I want you to find the most offensive thing you can find. And boy, did they. I mean, I was blushing at half of what they brought back. So when I'm called before the faculty ethics committee, just don't tell them I said that. Anyway, so we went through and we had this, why would this be in a research library? Well, multiple perspectives and all that. I said, that's great, that's fantastic. I said, all right, now, who's ready to go check that out? And one of them said, oh, I will. And like, other 30 went, no, there's the book. Right? We love to think that we create this environment, but are we creating a true environment? When we talk about privacy, do we teach them how to do Tor? Do we teach VPNs so they cannot be tracked by the government? What do we truly do? Or do we simply say, privacy is so important, we don't have this discussion, we discard your data? Right? So we provide a safe environment as librarians. Right? And the last one is motivation. So I can get to it, I know what's going on, I feel safe, I just don't wanna. So how do we deal with the I just don't want to? For example, we were just having a brief conversation about tenure before you all showed up. I don't want to. You ain't got no choice, right? So this idea of intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. When those librarians turned to the teenagers and said, you're in charge of Minecraft, those teenagers walked away feeling empowered. When my eldest, he was 9 years old at the time, they were going to do a makerspace and they were talking, well, we're going to do the 3D printer. We're going to do duct tape. Does everyone know you can build stuff out of duct tape? Like from wedding dresses to battle axes out of duct tape? I know you wouldn't want to wear them, but apparently you don't put the sticky side on the inside. That would be the worst wedding ever. Anyway, the woman then said, the librarian then said, if I can find someone to teach it, my 9-year-old within 10 seconds had his iPhone out and flicked through his duct tape collection. And she said, you're going to teach it. Our ride home, you would not believe the power and fulfillment and just outright blind arrogance my son felt. I am the duct tape king. I shall teach all the libraries about duct tape. You go, boy. So this is what we do. And we can do it in a building, and we can do it with books, and we can do it in an institution, and we can do it with a fox, and we can do it with a box. But the point of this is that value, those skills are transferable. And you sit there and go, well, Dave, what about information access and cataloging and reference and information literacy? They're in there. Right? Why do we organize things? To provide better access to it, but do we also prepare it in such a way that builds knowledge? I was at a group of librarians talking about GED training. They wanted a public library to help people get their GEDs. And it blew their minds because what they said was, oh, well, what we did is we found all the test areas and topics on social science and English and math, and we put all those materials on a table available. Clearly, we prepared them for GED education. And then this woman who was an expert in adult education and GED training came in and said, are you insane? You know what that's going to do to someone who's getting a GED because they got out of an environment that was overwhelming and they didn't have control in, and you've taken them into an environment that is now overwhelming that they don't have control in? It says the last thing you want to do with someone's GED is, oh, this is going to suck. This is really hard. This is impossible, right? What you want to start with is, okay, let's start here and then start. Sequence. Now, in pedagogy and learning, this is second nature. But in librarianship, have we ever thought about the idea of sequencing our collections? Other than the Dewey Spire in Seattle that doesn't count because God knows that was a bad choice. Anyway, right? That you sort of float through this. In the Chicago Public Library, when they built the kids space with the MacArthur Foundation, they put maker spaces, they put books at the beginning to inspire, and then you began to move through the space and you moved into more consumption tools and eventually into production tools and into, the idea is they created an environment that literally invited people bringing in. By the way, the library didn't do that. Librarians did that, right? The library was the space, but it wasn't on its own. But still, you say, Dave, Google. Google provides access. Google will give you training. Google provides an environment in which they sell your information. Motivation, sure, we all Google it. It's fine. So what's the thing that brings it all together? And this is the thing I think that we undersell in most library science programs, and I will include mine within it, which is we bring a serious sense of values to it. We are a principled profession, meaning that we have stated externally the principles that we bring. These, if you look them up, are not ALAs, they are mine. The first principle is learning, that we are about learning. We are about people expanding their understanding of the world. We bring openness to what we do and how we do it. We bring intellectual freedom and safety, and we are intellectually honest about it. Notice I did not say we're not unbiased. You can't be unbiased. You can't be unbiased. Give up being unbiased. You can't be neutral. You can't be objective. You're a human being. Deal with it. What we can do is say, these are potential biases. These are potential limiters. These are things you should be aware of. I mean, I'm sorry, if someone comes in and they ask about, what is it? What is the best apple in the world? Now, you're in Maryland. You have no idea. I'm sorry. Right? You guys have red apples and you have green apples, right? And you don't eat the little ones. We know that. Right? Red delicious apples. Red delicious, not the most delicious apple. I'm going to sue them. If you, however, and you don't, and people in Seattle will tell you it's the Fuji apple, they're also wrong. This is crap. In New York, we know our apples. The first answer is, of course, the Gala apple. Now, what would you say? She looked, I literally crestfallen from that one. Like, I went, oh, come on, damn. And as I'm going to bring up, what they did was they took the Gala apple and they scientifically crossbred it and created the Honeycrisp apple, which is an abomination of science and delicious. I mean, it is just amazing, right? So, Macintosh apples are great in pies. All right. So, we cannot be unbiased about apples. How the hell are we going to do it about gun control? How are we going to do it about marijuana usage? How are we going to do it about our own field? Right? So, when you put those together, you end up with a librarian. Now, a couple of us got together in Salzburg, Austria, and I'm bragging. IMLS and something called the Salzburg Global Summit put on a meeting on libraries and museums, wasn't my choice of terms, in the age of participation. And part of us came up with what are the core skills, what are the core competencies that librarians should have. And this is the list we came up with. We said the first thing that librarians should have is that they should understand, be aware of, and able to enact transformative social engagement. First thing, advocacy. Not only advocacy on your own part, but on the part of your communities. When your community needs change, are you there to facilitate and make that happen? Do you make a difference? If you're a public library, do you make something more than a suck hole for tax dollars? Do you make better education? We talk about democracy a lot. We talk about democracy a lot. Do we ever measure it? Have we ever looked at voter participation in the same district as a library? Have we looked at the idea of awareness of policy issues by library card? Have we looked at the idea of engagement in democracy? What if we actually did something about it? Transformative social engagement. By being a librarian and by working with the community should be better. Technology. Technology here defined as a convincing virtual presence. We didn't want to get down to thou shalt know PHP and oh no, it's really Ruby on Rails and now we all know. No, but you've got to be online. And you've got to be able to be in a convincing way online. Management for participation. That we have to understand that when people come into a room, they don't magically sit in rows like this and listen quietly. This is an abnormal situation. right? And I am an abnormal person, so I can recognize it. So how do we manage that? How do we handle questions? How do we set priorities? How do we create an environment that allows the loud guy to be heard and the quiet guy to be heard? My favorite project, for example, is the human library, where you can check out a prejudice, right? So you know, never met with a gay? Check out a gay. Check out someone, check out a black, check out a white, check out a wasp, whatever it is. But the point is, they did it in a library. Don't check out a wasp. They're really boring. Gin and tonic, you know, whatever. Anyway, they could sit and they could meet in the library because it was a civic, safe space. They were managed space. It was the idea that they could bring them in a way that they could collaborate, and that takes expertise. We can't assume that people just know it, or it will just happen. Asset management. Asset management was fascinating because not only was this the idea of managing books and materials and databases, this was tribal masks. This was tribal costumes in Africa, where the museum that had these materials on display, also they were used for ceremonies. And so they had to be maintained. Right? We know that libraries hand out fishing poles and Kindles and all these different technologies. Can we keep track of them? Can we keep them in good working order? Cultural skills, interwise, so maybe we can talk to each other, but understand that as we move. So for example, this is my favorite. Many underserved populations in inner cities of America, libraries want to help them. So what do? We bring them books. Yet if you look at the actual culture going on, much of it is an oral culture. Right? They have cell phones not so they can use the Safari on it, but so they can do texting and calling people. As the head of the Italian Library Association once put it to me, in America, when you want to make sauce, you go find a cookbook from your library. In Italy, we ask our mothers. Different cultures are going to use this differently. How do we interact with different cultures? How do we deal with a primarily oral culture, a hierarchical culture, a feminine culture, a masculine culture, whatever it is? How do we work across that? And finally, knowledge, learning, and innovation. We couldn't pick one, but I'll pick one. The idea that we teach. And that's a wrong word. We facilitate learning. So, for example, we love to look at a reference process as giving someone an answer. They ask me a question, I give them an answer. And we know that it's not that simplistic. We know that there's a lot going on in it. But the last thing we do is give someone an answer. What we create is a very finite, very specific, very customized, very intensive learning environment for them to pick something up. That is a teaching moment that may last 10 seconds. It's a teaching moment that may span over semesters. But the idea is that we're providing them an opportunity to learn. We can't give them an answer. I mean, every librarian has the case of where they gave someone an answer and the patron looked them right back and said, that's not right. So, the other thing that sits behind this curriculum is a series of value statements that librarians and museum professionals, by the way, should be open and transparent, should be self-reflective. They should understand where they are, what they do. How many of us have a curriculum? I'm always amazed that we send librarians to conferences. We say, continuing development. Go to a conference. Like, there's your learn, right? Well, what did you learn? What were you weak on to begin with? How are you coming back and what are you going to tell me about? What was your personal curriculum? What about service? Yes. Empathy and respect. Continuous learning, striving for excellence, creativity, and imagination. These are all things that should be in library and museum professionals. Now, I want to pick up on that point I made before about why does a curriculum have to happen every 7 years in big chunks? We know that there are things happening in this field, whether we make them happen, which I hope we do, or whether they happen on their own. Why can't we accept that within our curriculum? We know, for example, that the area of instruction, reference, and information literacy are crucial skills for librarians to have. We also know that that's simply becoming learning. That reference as we know it, as someone who knew all the different books and could find the materials and could type the fastest in databases, that's going away. And the idea of someone coming with a problem and we're providing solutions, we're providing resources, we're bringing together instruction, that's information literacy, that's learning. So why doesn't our curriculum look like that? Why don't we either set that up or say in 5 years we'll revisit this one topic? We know, for example, that assessment and big data is becoming analytics. Right? Now the question is, we know it's doing that, are we happy with it? one of the things I'm amazed at in academic institutions is that the student populations of the country's universities have become the largest data generating guinea pigs overnight, and no one told them. Right? How much data are you collecting on your students as a university, as a library, as a school? And how much of that do they know? How much do they have control of? How much do they look at? But how do we build that into our curriculum? How do we lead the field, and how are we responsive to the field? So my major points, and then I'll get to my conclusions. Future of libraries and librarians, I think, are different. Libraries as community collections. Librarians facilitating knowledge creation and ultimately embedded within the community. Librarians, side note, I think librarians need to become CCOs. I think we need chief conscience officers in many a corporation and business. And I think librarians are great to serve that role. I mean, there's one thing about can we collect the data. There's another thing of is that creepy? And there's, of course, the third one, which is ethical and is it legal? I'll leave that one alone. I'm in DC. I could disappear. All right. Curriculum revisions need to be at an agile model. We need to move from a 3-credit semester cyclical curriculum revision to continuous change. So what are the implications for the MLS? From commencement to continuing education to continuous education. We're a commencement model. We believe that in 1.5 to 2 years at the beginning of your career as a library professional, we can teach you everything you need to know for the next 20 to 40 years. Right? You get your bachelor's degree. Go be an engineer. Oh, it wore out. Come back, we'll give you a master's booster shot. Oh, it wore out. Come back, we'll give you a PhD booster shot so you're not good for anyone. And then you're on your own. That's a commencement model. We commence people in their career, in their stage, in their phase. Continuing education is once we're commenced, we give them these little boosters of, oh, this is how Twitter works, and oh, this is this technology. What if we move to a truly continuous model where alumni, instead of becoming people we go ask for money, that tuition becomes a subscription, where on a regular basis, they come in and take classes virtually online on a regular basis. And, here's a radical thought, they teach half of them as well. That our faculty keeps growing. Now, this would require a change in accreditation and university and state oversight. Going to, I'll pick my state, the state of New York, and saying, rather than giving you a curriculum, we'd like to give you a vague idea and a list of alumni. But that's where we're going. And even the state employees sitting there going, I can't keep up with my job. And you said, well, of course, if we open, I mean, what will disrupt higher education is not MOOCs. What will disrupt higher education is education, that we know how to do it differently than we did in the past. That the environment that we are in, that we don't educate people, we help them to learn, and they need to do it on a regular and continuous basis. I'm going to skip the story. It's a good one, but I'm going to skip. More. We need to move from how-based instruction to why, and a little bit of how. Right? Now, already librarians who love to pick on library schools say that we already don't do enough how. I get that. But if people don't understand where our ethics and values come from and instead are dedicated to organization, shelving, whether we use RDA and how we use RDA, and we never stop with the question of why the hell are we doing this, then who's going to come up with the next system? Who's going to decide? We can't do it all. I just want to start this. Libraries are already doing too much. We need to give up some things so we can do more important things. There's a whole web that needs a really good archiving solution, and we are the ones to do it. But we can't do it while we're trying to do everything else. So what do we give up? Well, if all you have to answer that is, well, this is what we've always done, you can't answer this is what we should do. So we need to teach these whys. Every course should have a practica component and a symposia component. See it, do it, talk about it, relate it, and connect it. Greater emphasis on research skills. It was fine when the world didn't change, or at least we pretended it didn't. But now that the world changes every 10 days, we need to equip information professionals and knowledge professionals with the skills to constantly find out what's new and what's coming. A greater emphasis on communication and facilitation, and schools and faculty must advocate for librarians in non-library contexts. We say it to ourselves because we want to recruit them to come pay tuition. But do we spend any time actually in the Fortune 500 telling them why librarians are cool? Do we spend any time at our government institutions telling them that you should take them out of those rooms and you should put them in your advocacy center, your outreach center, your field offices? You should do all these things? Do we show them how? One last thing and then I will shut up. I'm really worried about this question. Now, we've asked this question before about the L word versus the I word. We've had Michael Gorman berate us at ACES that we don't get it right. This was a stupid conversation at that time because ultimately we were fighting over the wrong things. What we were fighting over is, oh, we're paying too much attention to L and we give it doesn't matter. What I'm worried about is we crafted this thing called library and information science, and I think for the past 10 years, we've been busy pulling it apart. And I think we've done a really crappy job of picking what goes into what buckets. For example, in librarianship, we focus almost exclusively now about how, so we don't even teach research methods courses. I know they do here, we don't, I'm to blame, I'll take it. But what about library philosophy? What about the underlying theory of this stuff? Do they read these kind of materials? What about democracy and democratic participation? We're focused on a single organizational type, that of library. We're about information. Once again, however you want to define it, tends to be defined as document-like objects. But we're a principled field, ethics. This matters to us. And on the information science side, it's all about the technology. If it can move and I can put a computer in front of it, I can solve the problem. And it does have research skills. We worry about big data. We worry about data analytics and the use of R and all this wonderful stuff. But we really are talking about data. We're not talking about information on that side of the world. And we like to believe in the social science that somehow we can be neutral. That if we design an interface, it's neutral. That, oh, we've accounted for any potential bias in that. No. What if we put these things back together in a good way? I think what we would end up with is library and information science, whether you're working in a library, whether you're working in a Fortune 500 company, whether you're in the NSF or the NSA or Google, it's about knowledge and learning, because ultimately we're about making people do things better. It's participants, not users. We don't have people that consume us and walk away. We bring people into a problem and give them the tools and help them solve those problems. It's using technology, but ultimately to improve society. It's not like we have these really crazy socialists over here in the corner that are going to be librarians and these really great information managers who can crunch data and they're going to be the information scientists. That's wrong. It doesn't work that way. If we have technology implemented without principle, we end up with runaway technology in places we don't want to be. If we have principles in place where they don't understand technology at all, we end up with Adobe ebook solutions, where we're creating a false sense of security for our members, our participants, and saying, here's a tool. Don't worry, no one can watch it. Meanwhile, everyone can watch it. Oh, if you come, we won't tell anyone your search history. Oh, did you come through your internet service provider that can track every click? Yeah, they can watch that. We need to come together and work together so that truly we're all information professionals, not tech heads over here and communists over here. That's insane. We need to come together. So, with that, I will tell you to buy one of my books. This one's really great. It's about a courageous cancer survivor. I'll give away the ending. He lives. So far. But, questions? Or thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dave. Questions for Dave? I'll open up the floor and I think you may have
Wait.
some
Oh.
online as well. Lindsay's coming up. She has questions that she can track.
No, I actually don't, but I need the mic so that
Oh.
people can actually
Oh, the one John stole. Okay, very good. Cool. That won't be...
Come on, I just read it up. Let's do this. Online, guys, it's your turn.
I'm curious about your last book. So the piece about bringing library and information science together, what are some of your thoughts on what perhaps created the schism, according to you, and like what do you mean by how do you propose to bring them back together?
So I was telling you, we had lunch, John and I, and we both got our PhDs from Syracuse, so we're talking old times. And I was saying, I think we were one of the first generation of PhDs that were sort of created as information science people. Because before you had people coming from the library world, you had people coming from management, you had people from communications, people from technology, and they created this really interesting multidisciplinary stew. But they all really believed in, for example, the user-based approach, or they all really believed in the idea of information and how it was very sort of this idealistic sense. And then I think what happened is we went out and we said, ooh, we need to add more to the mix. And we started bringing in people from other areas and other disciplines, but in doing that, we didn't necessarily stop, reflect, and say, do we all still carry the same religion? I use that broadly. But, did we ever, it's one thing that when, we were doctoral students, no one stopped and had a conversation about what is our intellectual signature? Because it was stamped on our head every day by every person. Now, I'll take up Syracuse. We have this. Why are we all in the same room together, right? Move from multidisciplinary to interdisciplinary. Now we're in transdisciplinary. But I think the idea is that this is information science's great telling. There are so many problems out there that we can make massive advances in with technology that we forgot to say, is there a perspective that we're bringing when we bring those technology solutions? What is it that holds it together? So I don't think this is an irreparable problem. I think it's just a matter of saying we're all so busy with real good problems that we haven't stopped and crossed to each other and said, I love being in the same room as you because. We just assume that we're in the same room for some reason. That would be solution.
You've picked apart several words here, and I actually appreciate that a lot. But I have a problem where being in the PhD program here, I explained to somebody I do information studies. I can have a 10-minute conversation with somebody about my research, that it's basically libraries and archives. Then they'll start asking me about how to fix their computer. They still think I'm IT. If I say I'm libraries and archives, they're like, oh, questioning the academic strength of it. Can we start having a conversation about trying to move to something that actually says what we do? Because right now I think that we've chosen this odd middle ground where we have two different ways of not really saying what we actually do.
Mike Heisenberg, I mentioned, was my advisor. Ray Von Dran was my dean. And they're two of the people who put the iSchool movement together. And part of the reason, deliberately, to put that together was marketing. It was to say, you go to J school, you go to L school, now you're going to go to iSchool, right? And that we had a perspective on it. And then it got bigger, and we brought in other folks, and sort of, once again, never stopped. We knew who was the original iSchool. Maryland, Syracuse, Drexel. Washington came late, but anyway. Don't tell Mike I said that. Hi, Mike. But I still don't think we've had that conversation. The other one is, this is the advocacy. And so I'm going to give my personal moment. I used to go, so I spent a lot of time in doctors' offices over the past 3 years. In the first year, I come in and the doctor's breaking question so he knows you is, what do you do, right? Because it's kind of like, it's going to be innocuous, it's not going to take him too much time, and he's going to give you the pill anyway. So, Dave, what do you do? And I used to say, oh, I'm an information scientist. And that would lead into, oh, IT. And I realized that what I needed to start saying is I'm a library information scientist. And that would tend to be, you would get the questions like, oh, libraries. So, and you get two, right? Either, oh, libraries. But more often than not, you would get, oh, libraries. But not because they were terribly interested in them. They just thought it was such a romantic notion that it was still there, right? I talk about, how we love libraries to death, right? What do you think of libraries? Love it. When's the last time you were there? No, not so much. I think we need to, unfortunately, I think we're in a time where we need to sit down and have those 15-minute long conversations. But it's a real problem. I don't have a solution. Because I had a doctoral student who said, I'm doing my doctorate. It's in critical theory. I'm looking at participation in education in libraries. And why am I doing this in an information school? And I said, because of the information perspective. And she goes, and that is? And I went, give me a minute on that. Because it's true. What was the information perspective from Syracuse University when you got your doctorate? Oh, please. User-based. No, but user-based meant it had a history. It was TEFCO. We went down to, oh, the computers are bad. We had beers with Mike Nyland. We had, Taylor told us, right? We had a whole literature that we could say what that was. I couldn't tell her I could tell her what I had. But no, I think it's a sincere, real problem. That's why I think we need to put them back together. That's how I would start doing it. but maybe different in Maryland. Yes?
I'm an archivist, so I'm afraid to be documented or recorded because I know the impact of documentation. Anyway, just kidding. So you basically have an assumption of libraries, archives, and museums as institutions of out to provide some kind of positive impact or outcome in society. But would you consider some kind of negative impact that we might be making, and and how do we think about those things? Sometimes I'm not really worried if we're not making an impact, because well, it's nothing, right? But if it's negative, that worries me a lot. Thanks.
So that same line about everyone loves libraries because it's hard. It's like you can't do anything evil in a public library because you throw a public library in front of it, right? So, what did you do? We did a reading program in the public library. Oh, we did a chess program in the public library. We did 3D makers. We did, home meth making in the public library. I think the answer is absolutely, and this is back to that non-biased comment. Any institution, and yes, I know I'm talking institution, already makes an impact within their community, right? If we take tax dollars, if we take tuition dollars, if we take from the bottom line redirect income dollars, if we take space, we have an impact, an environmental impact, even mind space impact. One of the issues that I had is that public libraries, for example, their competition isn't Google, it's the Parks and Recs department, it's the sanitation department, right? So we're taking money away from good sewers. That can have a negative impact. So the question, first of all, because I think a lot within our profession, we assume that the impact happens out there. I don't teach. The professor, the teacher in the school teaches. I provide resources that the students take, but that's not my problem. I don't have an impact because I'm a public good. I'm a civil servant. I'm whatever. So the first is to acknowledge that you have impact regardless of what you do. Then the question becomes positive impact. This is where it gets really tricky, right? Because there is a great difference between being right and being righteous. And I will tell you, I err on the side of righteous all too often. And that's where we talk about a community, what is the community's dreams, aspirations, what do they want to pursue, and how do they define forward? And we want to have a voice in that so that we feel comfortable in enabling that, in empowering that. But that comes from the community. I say that because all too often we say it's reading, it's literacy, it's storytelling, but we don't know. In Philadelphia, they were going to close a lot of libraries. And the citizens stood up and sued the mayor from stopping the libraries. And we all said, yes, libraries, the community loves us. And then you heard why. And the why was after school activities, that they didn't want their kids going into gangs and violence, and so they knew they'd be safe in the library. They didn't care if there was a book in there. They didn't care if there was a librarian in there. They didn't care. I mean, I think power was optional in those rooms, right? And so you say, is all that we're doing after-school babysitting? And is that enough, right? I would argue that that's not. So a negative consequence, yes, I can see libraries that have had negative consequences. They've taken resources away from much more interesting projects to do much less interesting things. I have seen, as institutions, I have seen libraries as organizations, meaning librarians within them making bad decisions that have held back scholarship. I've seen academic libraries that have prevented good scholarship, the attraction of good scholars, the support of those scholars, and the dissemination of their work. They have been antithetical to that pursuit. So yes, they can have negative impacts. You're absolutely right to point out there is an unstated assumption that what we do is good. And what I will take that as an opportunity to say you're absolutely right, and that's why I think we bring our values and our ethics into it, but also a dialogue with our own communities, not listening to them and figuring it out, but with them. So, is that fair?
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.